One thing I've really been trying to do is trying to figure out how to read the Bible as if you were an ancient person. So, like an ancient Jew 3,000 years ago when the Bible took place. Now, it was written somewhere around 500 BC, or that's when Genesis was written. And hence we have this title, The Hidden Character of Avram. Because what I've discovered is that there is this very rich, what's called a midrash or rabbinical tradition, where these rabbis have been dedicating their lives, their entire lives, just to thinking about and discussing and debating the Torah. And this tradition has been going on for thousands of years. And so it's a remarkably well preserved tradition. And these are the guys that really understand how these ancient texts were written. Because one of the main problems when you're looking at these texts is you're reading it as a modern person, and so the potential for anachronism is just like, it's insane. It's, like we miss 90% of the text because we don't know the context under which it's written. We don't understand exactly what the people, what they valued the most, what their expressions or idioms or I don't know, just what the things that were top of mind for them. And like, for example, if you were to try to explain the Super Bowl, let's say 1,000 years into the future, there's someone going through our old videos and they're watching the Super Bowl and they're trying to understand what the Super Bowl is. And it's like, how would that person figure that out? They'd be like, okay, it's a big bowl, I guess. Looks like they had a lot of different bowls. And then I guess in this bowl they put, you know what I mean? Like it would be so difficult to communicate what that feeling was like. Just all the culture that surrounds the Super Bowl. How do you communicate that, And basically we have this tradition that's alive and has been thriving and well preserved, I think at least over the last 1,000 years and possibly earlier. This is the Midrash tradition, and I discovered this through a podcast called BEMA podcast by Marty Solomon. And so I'll be shamelessly just borrowing all that stuff from him as I explain what this hidden character of Avram is. But also I want to give some background and add some color to this from my own research. So here we go. The hidden character of Avram, and this is for anyone, whether you've been a religiously practicing Jew or Christian for the last 20 years, or whether you're a hardcore atheist, or whether you're new to anything. So, all right, so let's jump right in. Here we have the hidden character of Avram, and what I first want to talk about is this idea of revelation. And I don't know about you, but when I read the Bible, I hear things like, "Thus saith the Lord," or they're in this two-way, really engaging conversation with God. And I will tell you, I'm the first, in my experience, I have never heard the audible voice of God. I have no idea what these people are experiencing when they're like in this literal dialogue with God. And, it can be intimidating. Like you're trying to follow Jesus or whatever, you're following the Torah, and you're trying to be really faithful, and you're trying to hear from God. And, it's kind of discouraging. You're reading these ancient people, and it's like they're just talking to them, and you're like, how is this happening? And then it's like, well, how did the Bible come to be? How did the Torah or the Gospels, these different things come to be? And it's almost like they were just writing verbatim what they heard in their head from some like extra dimensional being, God. And I wanted to shed some light on that, or just kind of my idea of what revelation actually is. So yeah, revelation is intuition. So it's this idea that when these texts were put into place, right? Like the actual construction of these inspired revelatory texts, I've often thought it was just like this, like DMs from heaven, right? Like a fax machine from heaven, where they just get all these audible words in their head, and then they just write it down word for word, and boom, this is the This is the instant revelation from God, totally infallible, the direct transfer from God to me to you. This is the authority. And I don't think that's how the ancients saw it. Like, I think our view of that is deeply anachronistic. It's distorted. It's kind of, I think it's a little bit naive, if I may say. And this is, I'm a person who used to think this, that it was just a direct transfer. And it's not to say that you can't hear from God, but I think this experience or this notion of an audible voice or this completely foreign voice in your head that is God as a regular occurrence, I think is not accurate. And I think we see evidence of that from how these documents, these scriptures were put together. So let's take a look at that. Now, basically, we're going to explore how we see revelation occurring within the scriptures themselves, but I also want to look at some other sources too. So we're going to look at Gilgamesh, and this is an excerpt from a woman named Stephanie Dalley. And from what I understand, she's a pretty respected resource, respected scholar in ancient Mesopotamian studies. And here she's talking about how they have, you could call it the source criticism, right? How they see Gilgamesh, how it came together. And if you look at the slide, right, some of these, there's kind of these stock Sumerian tales. She calls them like stock folk tales. And you can kind of trace the etymology or the origin of these folk tales. Like you can see evidence of them in Gilgamesh. And so she says, some of these tales were incorporated with considerable changes right into this epic. And she lists these different tales. So these, Gilgamesh and the Hollow Tree and the Huwawa, the Bull of Heaven, right? Huwawa, it sounds like Chihuahua. The Descent of Inanna. These tales exist on their own. And through comparing texts and dating things and all the great techniques that they have pretty much collectively decided that Gilgamesh is a composite tale, that it was put together, it was a number of different narratives put together by a master narrator to form an epic, right? And so this process, it was you could say a human process. It was a very intuitive one. It was one that probably took a lot of experimentation. Dali talks about the evidence of something called contest stories, where they tell two different stories about the same thing, and then everyone votes or claps or whatever on which story was better. And that's an intuitive process. And that's how anything kind of comes to the surface, right? Rises to the top and becomes widespread and well known, is simply it's basically a popularity contest. And that is in fact an intuitive process. How do you know when you like something? How do you know when a story is a good story? It's like, oh, I like that story. There's no real reason, you just like it, and then you go back and figure out, okay, why do I like it? But liking something or not liking something happens immediately, and then you have to go back and analyze it. So this is sort of like, that is kind of like a divinatory, revelatory experience, because it's something that you can't really explain. You have to go back and explain it. So this idea of revelation as an intuitive process, we see it evidenced in Gilgamesh, in the Mesopotamian area, Sumeria, Ur of the Chaldeans, Ur and Uruk, these cities had evidence of shared tales, like Gilgamesh, these different folk tales that Dali lists, especially Descent of Inanna and the Flood, of course, right? They shared stories. And when they put together big stories, oftentimes it was comprised of smaller stories. So there was no such thing really as an original, per se. I don't know that they really cared if something was original. They just wanted the best story, the story that seemed the most true, that captured the imaginations, that spoke the most into their lives, right? So here we have a clear example, according to the scholars of our day, of how Gilgamesh was put together, and that was a very intuitive process, even though maybe at the time they might have said, okay, this came down to us from heaven. This is the voice of Anu. Is it Anu? Is it Anu? I don't think it's Anu. Oh, it is Anu. Okay. Anu or Enki or Ishtar. This is their voice coming to me, and here's the story of Gilgamesh straight from heaven. It could have that feel. So I want to talk about how we can see composite tales in the book of Genesis. And I don't know if this will be scandalous for some people, but I think my purpose in doing this is to, I don't know, maybe peel back the curtain, or to help us understand what does it mean to hear from God. And if we think of revelation as an intuitive process, what that does is that opens the door for everyone to take this, maybe like a fun perspective, but also something where it inspires you a little bit more. You can be atheist, as I said, a long practicing religious person, or very new to a religious practice, and to think of revelation as just your intuition. Now everyone can do this. You could, for an atheist, I would say it's listening to your highest intuition, the one that just by feeling, and this doesn't have to come from God, you don't have to have that story, but it comes from maybe the best part of yourself, maybe the age-old epigenetic knowledge from whatever millennia of you evolving over billions of years, whatever story you have, this ability to, I don't know, sense information that you can't consciously understand, but that the unconscious has this ability to do. Just whatever story you have. Or if you're very new to the religion, just saying, hey, look, you don't have to hear the audible voice of God. Okay, it's not that you're not holy enough. You can listen to this quiet intuition inside yourself and say, maybe that's inspired by a higher power. And so it's even instructive for me too, because it's really helped me take my intuitions more seriously, and realize that, I think God's speaking all the time. And if an ancient person came into our, teleported into our time period, and we were to tell them some of the stories where I was like, I just had this feeling that I should do this, and they'd be like, oh, that's the voice of God. Maybe they would say that is absolutely the voice of God. So let's take a look at it. Okay, so I'm going to go through a number of duplicate tales that exist within Genesis that give some evidence that the process with which they heard from God was this very deliberate, very thoughtful, very introspective, very collective process of elevating stories, stringing them together in narratives, comparing notes, criticizing each other, right? Critiquing, improving, rejecting. And okay, so here's one example. Be'er Sheba. Be'er Sheba is this very famous well in the book of Genesis that shows up at very important moments in the narrative, and it shows up multiple times. Now, the interesting thing about Be'er Sheba is that there's I'm going to quote you 3 different stories of how it was discovered. And these stories are within the same book of Genesis. They are very close to each other in chapters. And so whoever the redactor was, however these stories came together in a single narrative, they were very deliberate in putting multiple stories, of the same thing but told differently. So Be'er Sheba. Here we have, people probably don't know this, or maybe no one's really familiar with Be'er Sheba, but Be'er Sheba was first discovered in the Genesis narratives. The redactors, this is how they told the story. It was discovered by an Egyptian slave woman named Hagar. And, most of you know the story of Exodus, where, tell the Pharaoh to let my people go. The Israelites and the Egyptians don't necessarily have the most cozy relationship, and yet here whoever put the scriptures together, they decided that no, the right story is that it was it was Hagar, an Egyptian slave, that discovers Be'er Sheba, this very important well, very important to the patriarchs. So here she went on her way, right? She enters into this desert, and it's God, Elohim, that opens her eyes, and she sees this well of water that later is named Be'er Sheba. So here's the first story of Be'er Sheba. And then what? Not even a chapter later, within the same chapter, here we have another story, and this is Abraham, the father of faith, right? He's talking to Avimelech, this Philistine king, and he's trying to tell him that, look, this is my well. I discovered this well. I claim it. And so accept these 7 lambs from my hand, right? This is some ritual where if you accept if King Abimelech accepts these ewes, these lambs, then that's him affirming that, yes, okay, I agree, Abraham, you dug and discovered this well. So that place was called Beer Sheba, and they're naming it again, right? So now Abraham discovers it a second time within the same chapter, right? These are multiple fragmentary narratives, at least it looks to me, that have been woven together by, right, some tradition, the keepers of the tradition, the rabbis of that time. And here's the final one, mention of Be'er Sheba being discovered. It's Abraham's son, Yitzhak, and he discovers it in a similar way. He is also talking to Abimelech, and basically while he's negotiating or discussing a peace treaty with Abimelech, once the peace treaty is solidified and they hold a feast, then Yitzhak's servants come to him and they're like, hey, we found water, we're going to call it Sheba. And lo and behold, why don't we call the town has a name of Be'er Sheba. So Be'er Sheba here is discovered for a third time. So, these are 3 tales of Be'er Sheba, all of them pretty different. And they strung them together in a single narrative, almost, side by side. And yeah, and this is the rabbinical tradition. So, is this the voice of God? Did they hear from heaven specifically? Oh, here you go. Here you go, Herschel. Heschel, write this down. Okay, it was discovered this way. Now it's discovered this way. Did God contradict himself? No, I think this was what you could call sacred history. This is traditional history, and this was put together through a very corporate, intuitive process. So this is the word of God, right? The word coming down from a collective intuition. That was a very high intuition. That sure, inspired by God, inspired by something that was beyond ourselves. You could say that, but also you could say that, well, it was also very intuitive, but what, it's like, well, what is intuition exactly, right? So anyways, here's one example. Here's another example. Beth El, the house of God. A very similar process here. What is the role of Beth El? When did they discover Beth El? I'm going to use the example of Yaakov. Although Beth El was discovered, I think, 3 times by Yaakov. So Yaakov gets actually he goes off to find a wife. I wouldn't say he gets kicked out of his house, but his brother wants to kill him, Esav, and his mom is like, okay, maybe you should go and try to find a wife now, so your brother doesn't kill you. So he flees. And he encounters Elohim. I think it's Yahweh at that time. There's different names for God. And this is the famous Jacob's ladder, right? And basically he takes a stone and he sets it up as a pillar, right? He makes it a sacred stone and calls that place Beth El. So this is the first discovery, Genesis 28. Okay, what do we have in Genesis 35, just 7 chapters later? This is Yaakov again. There he built an altar, and he called the place El Beth El, because he was fleeing from his brother. He names it again, right? This is a totally different incident. Now it's from the same type of scenario, him trying to get away from his brother, but this is right. This is another time he named it Beth El. And what do you know? Not even 7 verses later, 35:14. Oh, he takes a stone where God had talked with him. He pours oil on it, and then. Oh, and this is when he called it Beth El. Here we have 3 different independent accounts. Obviously they're related. They have similarities, but they're mentioned in 3 different places in the Bible as if it's happening for the first time. So, again, you tell me, what is the Word of God? I think it comes from a rabbinical tradition. I think it comes from fragmentary narratives that were elevated and strung together, very. Not haphazardly, very thoughtfully, strategically, with the intent of communicating a deep truth, of preserving an identity of a people, right? But certainly not specifically write DMs from heaven or fax machine from heaven where the infallible word of God, right? It's not the notion that I think that I had, at least when I first became Christian or first heard of the Bible, this concept of the word of God. So that's another example. Here's a big example. One of the central central concepts or central events in the Israeli or the Hebrew tradition is this idea of the covenant that they first established with Elohim or Yahweh. And you would think that this huge event, this monumental event that gave Israel its name, right? That gave this people an identity as the chosen people. You would think, from a Western perspective anyway, that you would just have one account, that there would be one epic story, the crescendo of our history, the apex moment where we received our identity, and we would tell this to our sons and our son's son. That, you would think there would just be one amazing story that we could all tell everyone. But, well, apparently not. Apparently the Eastern tradition is just so different from ours that they thought, you know what, one is good, two is better. So here's the very first covenant that's established. This is Yahweh talking to him. Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram. He's setting up what's called, I think it's called a blood covenant or a blood betrothal. This is similar to a Hittite marriage ceremony, from what I understand, and this is a very famous covenant set up by Elohim, Yahweh, and Avram. And so this is what starts it, and this is where he says, your descendants will be enslaved 400 years in a land that's not theirs, right? It sets up the whole Exodus story, and so you'd think, okay, and also there's so many great pieces to that story, but this is the very first covenant. You think, okay, this is it. This is where it all began. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Abraham, this is where he met God, and this is the beginning of our nation. Well, oh, oops, I got the verse numbers wrong. Anyways, okay, so, but, a few chapters later, I think it's Genesis 17, when Avram is 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am El Shaddai. This is a different name for God. Before it was Yahweh Elohim, now it's El Shaddai. El Shaddai seems to have an older lineage. Shaddai means mountain, so the El, the great mountain one, El Shaddai. El means God. It's a Canaan god, a Canaanite god, and Shaddai is potentially from a Sumerian word. So you have this very, very ancient word, El Shaddai, and they set up an entirely new covenant, not just 2 chapters later. And this is my covenant, right? This is at the bottom here, every male among you shall be circumcised. So this is the covenant of circumcision. So now here we have these 2 different accounts, right? It's almost like they didn't even realize that they already had a covenant set up. It's like God or El or Yahweh. I think we just did this, didn't we? And yet, here we are again, just 2 chapters later, we're setting up an entirely new covenant. And so, what do you make of that, right? It was done intentionally, and they had a purpose to it, and they communicated something, very deep, very, very powerful for that culture by having these 2 covenants side by side. And it's like, okay, and then we can talk about what that would mean, but, just to say, this is part of their deep rabbinical tradition. It was very conscious and very strategic, and they were trying to say something by putting both of these in there, but it's not specifically exactly what you would call, the infallible, mathematically correct word of God, right? This is sort of like a poetic, communicating deep philosophical, spiritual ideas sort of thing. It's not so much who, what, when, where, why, right? It's more about, it is more about the why and it's more about the who and the why rather than the how and the what, right? It's just a different way of communicating truth. So right, all that just to say that Revelation doesn't have to be this intimidating or even cartoonish, fantastical thing. If you're a materialist, you're scientific and atheist, you don't have to see it that way. You could see it as a process of intuition, of collective intuition that stretches out over millennia. And it's like, what happens when people are able to get together and actually do that in a concentrated and focused way like the Jewish people have? What results and what you get is this very powerful book that has lasted through ages and has shaped an entire hemisphere of our globe. So if if you want to call it an intuition, that's fine. I hope you don't mind if I call it the word of God. Like that to me is pretty amazing in and of itself. But just to say, like, we have access to this intuition. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you follow, what book you read at night. You have access to this intuition because you're human. You have an intuition. You could say you have the breath of God in you, or you have this higher knowledge that maybe you don't have immediate access to with your thinking brain, but you have it with your sort of gut instinctual brain, right? It's just like if you watch a movie and you like the movie, and then you go, huh, why did I like that, right? Those are two different kinds of intellect at work there. So that's revelation as intuition, and that'll kind of help us understand this idea of the hidden character of Avram. So before we kind of get into that hidden character, I want to set the table a little bit, provide some context so we can approach this as a 1000 BCE Jew, okay? And so let's take a look at this. Now, one thing that's really interesting about these ancient books, right, Genesis, is that you would think that these people would be perhaps somewhat straightforward and maybe a little simple, right? They're a little bit innocent of the world. They don't have computers. They don't understand electricity, right? They don't really understand how the world's put together. And maybe they are a little bit simple in how they see things. And so you would think their religion would be kind of like, "Rawr, me, Israel, God, our God strongest, our God kill your God," like that. I think that's how I catch myself seeing these people, and how it's often advertised. And you've heard the popular idea of religion as a form of control and a vehicle of nationalism, and it promotes all these divisions and blah blah blah. But these Jewish texts, there's a reason why they've lasted this long, and why even Christians to this day still revere and are very passionate, take a lot of pride in their knowledge of the Jewish Bible, because it is incredibly deep and subtle, and we're about to see just how insanely deep and subtle it is. I mean, it is no less subtle than, like, it is Shakespeare just on a different level. So the chosen, right? The Israel are these chosen people, and that kind of feels not great, right? If you're not Jewish and you hear that they're the chosen people, it's like you just kind of like, oh, a bunch of bozos, like, what are you talking about? Like, you were born into it. How are you chosen? And the Jews, the ancient Jews from 3,000 years ago, they might agree. They might go, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's not so simple as just being born into it. So they explore this idea of what it means to be chosen, and they wrestle with this idea a lot. And it's like, what does that mean? Because I don't think they saw chosen as just this direct, God yells down from heaven with this megaphone, hey, he's chosen, you're not, like, I think the way these scriptures are put together was intuitive, and so they're trying to figure out, okay, what does it mean to be chosen? Because maybe they're not necessarily directly hearing from God, but they're all getting together and talking about it. There seems to be this thing called chosen. Like, what does it mean? Why does this guy seem like he's got everything going for him and this guy doesn't? So chosen is intuition, and they explore this a little bit with this idea of firstborn. So that's the first thing I'll talk about, the firstborn. Now, kind of put yourself into this setting, right? We're 4,000 years ago. The first cities, the first evidence of nations are becoming manifest, to even mankind. This idea of a nation is like kind of new at that point. Well, it's a couple thousand years old, but it's certainly still kind of fresh. And they live in these patriarchal, nomadic societies where you have flocks and herds, and your currency wasn't really dollars, or they didn't have a sense of money. They had a barter system still, and so what you had were herds and flocks and land and minerals and gold and weapons, and right, this is how you lived, and you were nomadic, and so you went one place and pitched a tent, and then you took it down and you went another place, right? And so these tend to be nomadic societies, and they lived by very strong systems, traditional systems. And so most patriarchal societies, right? It's the father, it's the firstborn. These are the ones that rule over the tribe, that take care of the tribe, that handle disputes, that lead their movement through different lands, or war with different tribes, or make treaties, whatever. All the different parts of managing a tribe. Not that I know what that is necessarily, but so these are ancient patriarchal societies, and the firstborn is a really big deal because this is the son that the firstborn son, of course, right? It's patriarchal. They're the ones that inherit the land. They get the father's main blessing, the main inheritance, and then they carry on the family name. And progeny, which we'll talk about, was a very big deal back then. You needed an heir. If you didn't have an heir, like it caused a lot of chaos within the tribe because they didn't know who should lead. So it's like the firstborn was a really big deal, and that's considered like the blessed child, the one who, right, the one who has all the responsibility but also all the power. And this is kind of like a form of chosen. If you were born first, then you were sort of chosen by God, right? You would think, oh, well, God made him come out first, so then obviously he's the firstborn. But, not really. In Genesis, they kind of, I don't know if they wrangled at this idea, but they're like, it's not the best idea. Like, just the firstborn that comes out, like, he is the firstborn, and because maybe they saw it go wrong in a number of different ways. But in the Genesis narrative, they really, really stretch and push the limits of this concept of firstborn. And in fact, every single patriarch, right, at some point, once the nation kind of gets going, God is constantly referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are the three forefathers of the entire nation of Israel. And guess what? A lot of them, let's say, they were secondborn, right? They were not firstborn. And there's this idea that firstborn, it's not who was born first. They got super meta with it. They just started getting like, okay, what does that mean to be firstborn? What does it mean to be chosen, right? And so here we have Yitzhak, firstborn, right? Firstborn? No, man, he was secondborn. Ishmael was firstborn. What about Yaakov? Surely he must have been. No, Yaakov, secondborn, He was the younger. Esau was his older brother, and that's partially why Esau wanted to kill him, which we'll talk about in a sec. Oh, but Avraham, right? He's the father of faith. Okay, surely obviously he's the firstborn, right? I don't know. Is he? Was he? We will find out in this hidden character of Avraham. So basically, all of these chosen patriarchs, the father, the people that the Jews that they looked up to, the revered patriarchs, right? That whenever they talk about God, they invoke the name of Isaac, Jacob, Abraham, like none of them were firstborn. And yet they were firstborn. They were conceptually firstborn. Meta, they were firstborn. But physically, no, they weren't firstborn. So, right? And so this is like a nation. These are people that really thought about these conventions, these social conventions that they had to help their societies run. But they weren't like super, they weren't totally convinced by it. They were like, okay, we accept it, but like, wait a second, what does it really mean to be firstborn? So this was a very intuitive process, how they explored this concept. And so when I say firstborn is conceptual, they had this idea of what chosen meant. And I think part of that idea certainly was hereditary, right? Certainly was about your descendants and your lineage. Of course, that was important to them, but it was also kind of like a concept. It was an archetype. And they had like these two characters throughout Genesis that one of them, it's kind of like the hero and the villain, the guy that they love and the guy that they hate. There's this character that they hate. And this character that they hate is always the physically firstborn. He is actually the firstborn. And it's best described in this story about Esau and Yaakov, Esau and Jacob. Now, Esau was born first. It said that he was his father's favorite. He came out really hairy. I don't know what hairy meant back then, but I think it probably meant like a manly man. And he was a great hunter, great with the bow, very physical. But he had a certain kind of character about him, and it's probably best described through this story. Why don't we just read through this? So there's, Yaakov was a mama's boy. He was Rebecca's favorite. And you can kind of get a sense of the differences between these two guys. But here we go. Yaakov is at home, cooking some stew in his little apron. He's probably like, 120 pounds or whatever. And suddenly Esav comes in from the open country. He's famished. He's hungry. He could eat like 4 bowls of soup. He's a big strapping guy. And he goes, quick, give me some of that stew. I'm famished. He's like, yeah, what's up, man? He's like a jock. And Yaakov just sitting like in his little apron with his spoon, just going, oh, why don't you first sell me your birthright? He's just like this little kind of clever little shit. And Esav, in his bravado and machoism, look, I'm about to die. What good is a birthright to me? And basically, a few verses later, he sells Yaakov his birthright, he sells Yaakov his birthright for a bowl of soup. And the narrator says, and so Esau spurned his birthright. And this is the character of the firstborn that the Israelites hated. They came up with this character, right? And I mean, not to say he's not real, but it's like this is a character that keeps showing up in Genesis, and this is a guy that's you could say he's a worldly man. You could say he takes what's his, that he probably had a big laugh and he told jokes and he used to beat people up, and if someone insulted him, he'd punch him in the face, and you know what I mean? Like, he had tons of wives. And there's another scene where Revka and Yitzhak are just like, he has all these foreign nation wives, and they're just like, they hated them. And Esau's like, oh, okay, well, and then Yaakov marries an Aramaean who's of their line, and he's like, oh, maybe I'll do that too. And so, and he marries some women that are close to that line. And I don't know if that's a good example, but just to say, like, he's just kind of clueless and sort of self-absorbed, and he's just in love with his own strength, and he doesn't have a sense of like restraint or right. This is the character of the firstborn, and that's why he was rejected, right? That this type of guy gets himself into trouble. He creates trouble for his family. He can't think past tomorrow. He's impulsive. He's not chosen. He's not the firstborn. Yaakov, the deceiver, right? This guy who has a tough arc, right? A tough character arc. He kind of hustles his way through life, and he ends up getting into a lot of trouble. But there's a sense about Yaakov that he, even though he's misguided, he cares about the right things, and he plans, and he's able to, I guess, maybe delay gratification, right? He's able to make plans and strategize, and so it just makes him a better patriarch. And so the Israelites will say, okay, well, he's chosen according to the intuitive tradition. This is the guy that's chosen. That can be successful. That can do the right thing. So here we have this idea, right? Chosen as an intuitive concept, a meta concept. And so, let's kind of store that away, that the people who God chooses, it's not like they thought, I choose this guy. It's more like they had to kind of feel it out and go, you know what? I think that guy is the chosen one. And even though he's born second or born third or whatever. So we'll put that in the background. Another concept that I want to have just as we delve into the secret character of Avram is this idea of progeny, and it's one that's hard for us to understand now. I think now we're kind of opposite of the patriarchs in the sense that most of us don't want to have kids, and we're trying like hell to not have any kids. Where it was, I mean, it could if they had come back now to see what we do to not have kids, they would probably, like, the women would pass out and the men would start like tearing their beards and going out and trying to kill people, because it just was, they would think that we're insane, because the lengths that they went to try to have kids was like, the women, the men, both were like, if they couldn't have kids, they lost it, because that was their whole future. That was the whole point of their existence. That was their greatest value, was progeny, So I'll give you a few examples. Here we have Rachel, Jacob's wife, and Jacob is married to Rachel and Leah, and basically Leah starts having kids. God felt sorry for her because she was unloved. Yaakov really loved Rachel, and Rachel's sitting there watching Leah, like, have all these, pump out these babies or whatever, like, get all these kids, and she gets so jealous, and she goes, "Give me children or I'll die." Like, it just kind of paints the picture of like, this was part of your value as a woman. I mean, certainly as a patriarch too, but as a woman especially, they were considered the doorway of life, the gate of life. And if you're not gating out some life, man, what are you doing, right? So Rachel was disgraced that she was not having kids and give me children or I'll die. It's an expression, but I I think they meant what they said back then. You know, they didn't mess around. So there's one example. This example, let's see if I can do this one good because it's the overall story is absolutely insane. But basically, so Tamar, this is one of Jacob's son's wife. Anyways, Tamar, she her husband dies, and actually, in a sense, she has two husbands die. God kills both of them for various reasons. He kills the second one because he kept having sex with her and then pulling out and like spilling his seed on the ground. Which just if you're familiar with this, it's just like you're spilling the seed on the ground. Like you'd probably kill that person. You'd probably kill your son from doing that. Like that would not be out of the question. And I would like understand just given their situation. Anyways, so Tamar is there. She's childless. She's had two husbands killed, and she can't find someone to marry and have kids with. And she finds out that her father-in-law, Yehuda, is on his way back from sheep shearing or whatever, and she's like, oh shoot, here comes my patriarch who was supposed to give me, right, his third son. So if you look at the bottom here, for she saw that though Shelah had not grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. So Shelah, Yehuda was supposed to give Shelah to him as his wife. Or sorry, Yehuda was supposed to give Shelah to her as her husband, so that she could have kids and carry on the family line and win honor for herself. Like, it was so important to her. It was so important that she dressed up like a hooker and ended up having sex with Yehuda to make a point. To be like, hey, you owed me. I'm getting older. I ain't getting any younger here, okay? The clock's ticking. You owe me your third son now that he's full grown, because your first two sons kicked the bucket, right? God just did away with them. So you owe me that third son. And Yehuda was kind of like, I don't want to do that because the first two died. I want to lose three sons. And so he completely disgraces Tamar. And she's like, haha, I'm going to trick you. Dresses up like a hooker. Has sex with Yehuda. Conceives by him. And just the length that these people went to have kids. Like this was her honor at stake. And so she risks her life. Yehuda was going to burn her alive when he found out that she dressed up like a hooker. But what he didn't know was that he was the one that slept with her. And then he finds out and goes, okay, you're right. My B, like, okay, that's on me. I should have given you my son. It's fine. The hooker thing, we're not going to worry about because it was I who slept with you. Anyways, so you're kind of getting a sense, right? All right, so then in this final example, this is Avram, and we'll learn a little bit about Hebrew literature in this. So this is for free. Avram is talking to Elohim, right? And he's basically like sovereign Lord. He's being very formal. What can you? He's talking about how like he doesn't have any kids. Sarai is barren, his wife, and he's like, I'm childless. How am I gonna have kids? This is like a real problem. Because he's been given the promise, right? The problem to be a father of many nations, to basically like bless the entire world with his progeny, which will outnumber the sand on the seashore or the stars in the sky. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there being like, dude, I literally have no kids. And God, in the line before, is like, Avram, I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to be your great reward. And then, but Avram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And basically, my greatest servant Eliezer of Damascus, not even of my nation, I'm gonna have to pass it to him because there's no one else. I don't have anyone else. It's a very he's pretty depressed about this. So it goes, but Avram said, Sovereign Lord, right? And then it says, and Avram said. Now what that means, this device, when it goes, but Avram said, dialogue, right? And Avram said, what it means is that these are two different conversations. And so what does that mean? But Avram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me? And then what's God's response? Nothing. There is no response. And then sometime later, we don't know how long, a year, a day, a month, whatever, and Avram said, hey, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir, right? Like it's a little bit more, he's a little shorter, he's a little more short in the second restatement, right? In this first one, he's like, oh, sovereign Lord, Eliezer of Damascus, and he's like, hey, guy, hey, buddy, no children here, and my servant's going to be my heir. Just FYI on that, right? So this is a Hebrew literature way of saying, like, okay, Avram's getting a little bit testy here. It's a very subtle writing style, everything is sort of understated. So that kind of sets up the background, this idea of chosen as a concept, right? It's an archetype. It's not specifically like you're firstborn. You were first out of the womb. You are firstborn. You are chosen. Not so simple. That these stories explore how is it that God works, and it's not always dictated by what we think it should be, right? And then this world, this patriarchal world that they live in, progeny is like, that is like the currency. That is like your future. That is your honor as a patriarch. It is your honor as the wife of a patriarch. This is how you distinguish yourself, right? People would die for this. They would dress up as hookers and sleep with their father-in-law for, you know what I mean? Like it's just, they'd be like, give me children or I'll die, right? So this is the background with which we can now delve deeply into this text with this Midrash rabbinical tradition. This is Marty Solomon with the BEMA podcast, and we're going to dive into a part of the Bible that I can almost guarantee you have absolutely not dove into yet. You have gone nowhere near this thing. You've looked over it, but you have not dove into it. So we're going to do that. Okay, so now we're ready to really dive in to this character of Avram, and you're going to be surprised at where we discover who he is. So let's jump into it. Before we jump in, just want to let you know that this is really not brought to you by, but like this is deeply inspired by the teachings from BEMA Discipleship. It's episode 8, BEMA Discipleship. That's the podcast. I want to give them a shout out. I'm just shamelessly copying all their stuff. Like, it is such a great teaching that I want to share it, and it'll help me learn it. And so, hope you enjoy it, but definitely check them out. Marty Solomon is amazing. He's a Messianic Jew. He's trained with rabbis, and he just offers a ton of great information that I've never seen anywhere else. So I'm really excited about that. So here we go. The hidden character of Avram. We're going to look into, yes, that's right, the genealogy, and we're going to get into some cool, not Bible code, I say that facetiously, but it is kind of this cool stuff that you wouldn't normally see unless you kind of understood the rabbinical tradition. So it is sort of hidden, kind of cool stuff. Okay, so genealogies, right? Everyone's favorite part of the Bible. Here it is. I can almost guarantee you that you haven't looked into this. I know I haven't until I started listening to the BEMA podcast. Once again, BEMA Discipleship. Please check them out. But yeah, here's this, blinding list of all these, he lived and he was a father of this guy and he had sons and daughters, and it seems to go on forever and ever. And this is actually one of the things that we as modern people in the West just don't understand, because people in the East loved this stuff. They lived for this stuff. This was like their whole tradition, right? This is kind of where they got their status from. This is what they wanted to know, so they would go deeply into these things. And so we're going to dive into it. Obviously not the whole thing. We're going to jump in sort of right at the end of chapter 11, where it gets to this famous character, Avram, later to be called Avraham. And just to give some background, up until this point in the Bible, where humanity isn't doing so well, God, this creator of the universe, right? Genesis chapter 1 famously creates heaven and earth, everything in 7 days. He's not getting much luck. What do I mean by that? What are the stories that have happened so far in Genesis chapters 1 through 10, basically? Well, we have the creation story. That went pretty well, just created man. That was awesome. And then it went into the story of Adam and Eve. Went okay for a little bit, and then whoopsies, took a bite of the forbidden fruit, right? The tree of knowledge. They get kicked out of the garden, we could say. So that didn't go so well, and they bring this curse down upon them because they rebelled against God, and there's a whole story behind that. And so God's like, okay, we can work with that. I'll give you some clothing, and we'll get you tilling the land, and I'll still be with you. And they have two kids named Cain and Hevel, Cain and Abel. Famously, that also didn't go so well. There's Cain murders his brother Hevel, and then when questioned about it, Cain utters this famous line, "What? Am I my brother's keeper?" So, that murder, that didn't go so well, murderous people. And then we get into the flood story of Noah, where humanity got so bad that God was just so pained in his heart that he had to just wipe the whole place out to start again with a righteous man named Noah. So humanity, that didn't go so well. God's really having a hard time here. Noah, the one righteous man, ends up cursing his grandson in a fit of revenge. So that didn't go so well. And so God's kind of running out of cards here, okay? He's kind of just man, what do I do here? Oh yeah, and then of course the Tower of Babel, can't forget about that, where all humanity gets together and goes, we're going to make our own names great. And there's a whole story behind that, but that's basically man trying to elevate themselves over and above any real moral standings. And so that's kind of the arc of that story. And so, we're kind of at this depressing point in Genesis where there really is no one good. Everyone's just kind of out for their own thing, and they're willing to do anything they can to get it. And then suddenly we get this genealogy, right? Let's get back to this genealogy here. And we end up with this big storyline, right? All this genealogy, and it ends with this account of Terah's family line. And here we get introduced to Avram, and we get a sense of what his family's like. Now, I'll just kind of briefly read through this, and then we'll get a little diagram going so you don't have to go cross-eyed trying to figure this thing out. But we have Terah, and he's the father of Avram, Nahor, and Haran, right? These are three sons. And basically, and then Haran became the father of Lot, right? While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died. He died in Ur the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. And then we get some more information here. But here, let's just jump to the diagrams a little bit easier. So Terah had three sons, right? He has Avram, Nahor, and Haran, right? Avram, Nahor, Haran. Haran had a son, Lot. We don't know who he married. He dies while his father's still alive. Very sad. And then we learn that Avram and Nahor took wives. It says Avram and Nahor took wives, Sarai and Milcah. And then it says, let's go back to it. And then it says, okay, so Avram and Nahor both married, right? The name of Avram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now, Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. Let's go over that just one more time. We got three sons of Terah, right? We know Haran died early. And then it says Avram and Nahor both married, right? And they marry Sarai and Milcah. And then we find out, actually Milcah is the daughter of Haran, who actually also had a daughter named Iscah. And then, by the way, Sarai was childless because she, it's just we're kind of all over the place. Now, okay, if you are an Eastern person, actually, why don't we just keep it on this right here. If you are an Eastern person, a Near Eastern person in ancient times, and you're listening to this genealogy, and you're getting to all this information, you're starting to your ears prick up here, and you're thinking, what's up with this family? There's a few things that are kind of off about this family. Now, typically in patriarchal societies, right, the first person to, marriage, first of all, marriage is a big deal, which we already talked about, but the first person to marry is usually the eldest son. Okay, that's the first thing. You want to marry off your kids in order of birth. And here we have Avram, Nahor, and Haran. And what's going on here? Haran was married first, right? Because he had Lot. And then it mentions that he died, and then it mentions that Avram and Nahor married. So why is it Haran is the youngest? I mean, if you typically genealogies, they mention the sons in order of birth. So we would think Avram, Nahor, and Haran, like Avram's the oldest and Haran's the youngest. But it's like, well, why was Haran married first? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we get mentioned, like basically, women are not mentioned in genealogies. Like typically they're not. Like if you go back in this old genealogy, you can see that like if you look up here, Peleg, he lived father of Ru, and there's no names of any women in here. Until you kind of zoom into here, and we don't even know Terah's wife. We don't know Haran's wife. But suddenly we're introduced to these different wives. Now, Sarai and Milcah, these will both be characters later on in the narrative, so that kind of makes sense. But there's a couple of things. It's like, right, she was a daughter of Haran. Now they tell us that. The father of both Milcah and Iscah. Okay, Milcah and Iscah. This is the weird part. As an ancient Near Eastern listener, you're going, okay, like you might be confused about Milcah, but you find that out later in the story. But Iscah never shows up in the rest of Genesis. We never see that name again. And so, like, if you're reading this story as a Near Easterner, you're probably, you might read through some of the rest of this narrative, and you never find the name Iscah. And you're like, what's up with Iscah? Why that? And also, like, why is it mentioned in such a weird order? Okay, so this is one of the mysteries that you would think as a Near Easterner. First, you're thinking, why is Haran mentioned last, even though he's married first? Okay, so he dies in the middle, and then Avram and Nahor marry. Nahor marries Milcah, and then they just randomly mention Iscah. Oh yeah, and then by the way, Sarai is barren. Like, she can't have kids. It's like, what is going on? What is up with this ADD weird narrator who is listing this genealogy? First of all, either totally out of order or this is a really weird family. And then what's up with Iscah? This narrator just seems to like Iscah personally and then just doesn't include it in the story. Like, no, I mean, this story's been elevated to the highest, right? This is the story of their people. Why would they have this broken genealogy? Okay, let's think about this. Now, the first thing to know is that genealogies are not always by birth order. Okay, so in Genesis 9, chapter 9, when we talk about the sons of Noah, I'm about to sneeze. Oh my God. Okay, we have, right, the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? And it goes on, Ham, the father of Canaan, right? He sees his father naked. And then we have this narrative of Shem and Japheth, and blah, blah, blah. And at the end it goes, when Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him. All right. Now you go back to verse 22 here. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. This is a big deal. He saw his father naked. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son, right? His youngest son had done to him. And that's going to be Ham. So it does reference Ham. So it's like Ham is the youngest son. But why is he mentioned in the middle? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So genealogy is not always listed by birth order. So there's some reason then, like they'll shuffle it around for purposes of narrative or for purposes of teaching, because the purpose of recounting history, these sacred histories, is to learn something from it. They try to organize in such a way that we need to derive some kind of meaning from it. So that's kind of maybe the first thing. Okay, so for some reason, this narrator, this redactor, whatever, storyteller, has likely shuffled the birth order of these sons. He's listed Avram first for some reason and Haran last. Okay, so that's maybe the first part of the mystery. And so it could be that Avram's actually the youngest, and that's why Haran married. So that's kind of interesting. So the second part is we have this line, Avram and Nahor both married. Now, the tricky part about this is that you need to understand Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, and some of its idioms or devices, literary devices. And basically, when it says Avram and Nahor both married, the married verb, or one of the pronouns in there, I'm not an expert in Hebrew, but according to Marty Solomon, again, in the BEMA podcast, he says that the verb conjugation, this married verb conjugation, is with a singular pronoun. So it's as if only one person got married, but it says Avram and Nahor both married, meaning that like when they use a singular pronoun to describe two people's actions, it's saying that they're of one mind. So, right, this is kind of the main thing. This is one of the strange devices where if you read Hebrew, you'd be like, oh, that's where they use a singular pronoun. So they both married. Okay. Now, here's another example of the use of the singular pronoun. So, but Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. So basically, this is the same part. Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulder. In the Hebrew, it's using a singular verb conjugation, singular pronouns to say Shem and Japheth, he took a garment and laid it across his shoulders. And what it's trying to communicate there, so this is an act of kindness. If you recall that, if we go back to this part here, so Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked, right? And that's like really bad. That's a sin. That's like, there's a number of meanings behind saw his father naked. It's almost like when you say he lay with his wife, that means he had sex with her, like he had intercourse. When you see your father naked, that means a number of things. In this case, I think it means castration. But anyways, but Shem and Japheth, right? They took a garment and laid it across. So they performed this act of kindness for their father. And in the Hebrew literary device, what they would say is Shem and Japheth, they acted in one mind. He took a garment and laid it across his shoulders. Okay, so this is a literary device. And what it means in that moment is like if they acted in one mind, usually it's one person that suggested it. So in this case, Shem and Japheth. So if it's one person, if it was one person, like one person will get credit for this deed. And so Shem and Japheth, he took a garment. So who was it that will get credit for this deed? Whose idea was it originally? Probably. Like, what is the text trying to tell us? In this case, it's Shem's idea because he's listed first. So Shem and Japheth, he took a garment. It was Shem's idea, and later we find out that Shem is the one that gets the blessing. Japheth gets blessed, but Shem gets the bigger blessing. It's basically recognized that he was the one that decided to cover his father's nakedness, okay? So now if we come to here, Avram and Nahor both married. Avram and Nahor, he both married, right? He married. So now we have a similar grammatical parallel where they're using a singular pronoun to describe they were of one mind. And because they list both names, it's the first name that's mentioned that's going to get credit for this. I guess it's a good deed. Now, why is it a good deed? Let's look into that. I mean, there's these little clues in here. So Avram and Nahor, he both married. And it's like, okay, so what are they trying to say there? Well, first of all, whose idea was it? It was Avram's idea. And it's like, okay, well, why would they emphasize that they were of one mind, that this was something worth noting, that it was a dramatic act of kindness, of goodness, right? How can that make sense? Why was it such a good deed for Avram and Nahor to marry? Well, first of all, Nahor married Milcah. That one's kind of easy, right? He married Haran's daughter, and it's a little bit unusual in that time, but it's not totally unheard of. But what's up with Avram marrying Sarai? Why was that such a good deed? Like, what's going on here? And then, again, these mysteries, and then it's listed, oh, by the way, Milcah was the daughter of Haran. Oh, and also, he also had another daughter named Iscah. It's like, what the hell's going on here, right? And then Iscah we never hear of again. So it's like, why would they mention Iscah? So let's think about that. Now, if we look into the meaning of their names, maybe there's a clue here. Milcah means queen in Hebrew. And Sarai means princess. That's kind of interesting. Okay, so Iscah means like fortune teller. So that's kind of like a seer, like a prophetess. So we don't get too much there, but we have Sarai princess, Milcah queen, in the rabbinical tradition, what they think is that Sadai and Iska are the same person. And I was kind of thinking like, well, if Milcah's queen and Sadai is princess, maybe it's like, they're trying to express some kind of relation. One was born queen, one was born princess, they're together. And then you have this, like, if we go back into the genealogy, right, look at how it's described. Avram and Nahor, he both married. Avram took Sarai, and Nahor took Milcah. And then she's the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iska. So you can kind of see, like, Milcah is over here, and then Iska. It's like, what was the act of kindness then? Well, in a patriarchal society, it's like, we know that, like, your father is, well, certainly the head of the household, but your father is kind of everything. Like, later on in, I'm not sure where, oh yeah, in the New Testament, in the Gospels, there are stories of, like, one person being converted who was the father, right, the patriarch of the household, and then that meant the entire household got converted, because your beliefs, like, you are not a singular unit, you are part of the patriarchy, or the part of the patriarchal household, and whatever the patriarch believes, that's what you now believe. Whatever business the patriarch is in, that's what you support. And if you're a son, you carry on that tradition. Your father really defines a lot of your identity, and he is the one, like, you are represented by his name, and that's where you get your status from. That's who protects you. That's who provides for you. Like, the patriarch is your, it is your survival. Like, it gives you everything that you need to survive in society, to be part of society. And so we learn that basically Milcah and Iska's father, Haran, died early. And so now they're left without a patriarch. And it's like, your father was the one that gives you away in marriage. Like, if you're a daughter, you're given away by your father, and he also provides the dowry. And so it's like these two women, Milcah and Iska, these poor daughters, they lose their father, and now it's like, how are they going to get remarried? Like, who's going to want to marry these daughters who have no father? They have no family name anymore, basically. They have no protector, no benefactor. They've kind of lost their honor. And so Avram, right? Like, these are the dots that we're trying to connect. Avram and Nahor both married. This was a singular act of kindness. They both acted in one mind. I think what happened was Avram saw that, right, Nahor's, that Haran died. These two daughters are kind of orphaned now. No one's going to marry them. And he's like, you know what? Here's what we got to do, Nahor. We got to marry these women. We got to marry these daughters. And this was the singular act of kindness. And so it's like, right, so Avram took Sarai or Iska, Nahor took Milcah. Now here we learn, now Sarai was childless because we learn that she's barren. Now, throughout the story, what we're going to learn is that according to the rabbinical tradition, it was known that Sarai was barren. We don't know exactly how. Maybe they had some way of finding out, or maybe they had some, mystical way of divining whether or not it was accurate, but they believed that Sarai was barren. And we can talk about why that might be. So let's jump into that, and then we'll jump back into what that might mean. So, so the Lord had said to Avram, right, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I'll show you. And this is the famous moment of faith where Avram, the father of faith, he hears from God, and God tells him to go, and he just goes, right? And he has so much faith. This is what makes him a great man. And he gets this promise, I will make you into a great nation, right? Into a great nation. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm going to give you progeny. What's a great nation? You're going to have like a whole wealth of people, a proliferation of descendants and families that will come from you and will eventually become into this amazing nation. And here, according to the story, right, Sarai was childless. Now, did Avram know that? Well, here's why the rabbinical tradition feels like he did know that. Because what happens here? Avram went, right, as the Lord told him, right? And this is the moment where everyone recognizes that he's his father of faith. But what do we learn here? We learn that, right, Lot went with him. He was 75 years old. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, all his possessions. He took his nephew Lot. Lot went with him. And they're like, well, why did he take Lot? Like, Lot will be fine. He's a guy, he's a dude. He can, mentor underneath his uncle Nahor, who we learn later ends up being he's very well off. He has a big household. He's very prosperous. So Nahor could have taken him in, and it's not a big deal for Lot. Like, if he's linked to his uncle, then he can get married again. But they're like, well, why did he take Lot? And so here's some evidence. I mean, it's not like a mark against Avram, but Avram probably, the fact that he took Lot, I think he was unsure that he would be able to have his own progeny. Like, why else would he take Lot? He doesn't need Lot. And so that's why they feel like Avram was aware that Sarai was childless. And that's, I think, also why the storyteller put this piece of information inside the genealogy to let it be known that this was a known thing. And so what does that mean then, right? So if we go back to this genealogy and we have this birth order, we don't actually know what the birth order was necessarily. Now, if they reverse it, then Avram's the youngest, or maybe Avram's a little bit older. But basically, what we do know is that it was Avram's idea to kind of swoop in here and rescue these poor daughters and try to give them dignity and try to give them some honor. And because it was Avram's choice, right? Avram and Nahor, he both married. Avram probably had first pick, right? And it's like, well, he could have picked Milcah. He could have picked Iscah. Who did he pick? He chose the barren woman. And here, I think, is where this rabbinical teaching is so amazing, and where Marty Solomon really brings this story out, is like, right, what do we know so far about the world? Well, is it full of people that are selfless and self-sacrificing and are looking out for the good of mankind and trying to elevate the highest values? Probably not. I mean, we had Noah, where the world was so terrible that God had to wipe it out. We see some evidence of that potentially in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where these people were really bad. Like, strangers came in and they're like, whoever came in Sodom and Gomorrah, they wanted to basically sexually abuse them, like sexually molest them and rape them, and like that was their, not necessarily like homosexual rape, but probably though, like. So anyways, just say like that. I think the world was filled with that kind of violence, and that's why God had to wipe everyone out. And then we get the story of the Tower of Babel, and that's where everyone wants to elevate their own name, over and above whatever virtues that might be more important. Like, the world has been a pretty tough place, and God's kind of just like, shit, like, how am I, I don't know if he swears, but it's like, dude, how am I gonna, who's gonna, how am I gonna fulfill, like, who can I partner with to save this world, basically, to bring about my joy and my love into this world. And then here we learn about this guy named Avram, and it zooms in on this guy. And what do we learn first about him? Well, he commits an act of kindness, right? Avram and Nahor, he both married. He marries these orphan daughters. And who does he pick? He picks the barren woman. And what do we know about the patriarchal societies? Like, as a young man, what do you have going for you? What are you hoping for? Well, you're really hoping that you can have a big household and you can carry on your name and that you will be remembered, right? And then you'll carry on these traditions and you'll become a great patriarch, and like you'll be enshrined and you'll become a legend. Your name will be remembered forever. That's what you want back then. You want progeny. Like, you need a household. That's like the equivalent of becoming a millionaire or whatever. And what does this guy do? He marries a barren woman who's his niece, which is, I think, it's not totally out there, but it's a little bit, And then he hears this call from God to leave his household. And it's like, to me, I kind of think that's this sort of intuition. Did he hear the audible voice? I don't know. That's that's something we can talk about. But as I say, I think a lot of these, the way what they what, what they called the voice of God back then, I think was something that we might associate with intuition now. I don't know if it was an audible voice. I think it might have been like just an inclination or a conviction or a feeling. In this guy Avram, he's just so out of the mold. Like he's just such a different person. Like he was able to hear this voice that to leave your father's household, right? To leave everything he knows, to leave behind, in some sense, his family name, at everything about his world that's secure, that's everything that he knows. He has rich traditions. He probably has a lot of family assets. He's got a lot of connections. He's probably well respected. Maybe it's a very wealthy household, and he just leaves all that behind. All his father's traditions he leaves behind. I mean, this guy's just different, and you know, and he's kind of just like to hell with my name in some sense, to hell with the way the system works. This, maybe he just thought it was this broken system where you just had to fight for your own name. To hell with that. It's like, I'm gonna marry my niece who needs me, which back then it's like you took care of your own family first. Like she has no future basically. I'm gonna marry this woman. She's barren. I still believe in this promise. I believe. I don't know what he was thinking, but it's kind of like I somehow just believe that something is there for me, even though it's not according to the traditional paths. And I'm gonna risk sacrificing what is the secure path by marrying this barren woman. And I still believe that there's this promise, right? He hears this promise: I'll make you into a great nation. And he takes his nephew Lot as kind of, I guess it's kind of insurance, but it just goes to show that this guy is like, he decides not to just go after his own, his own name. He doesn't put his own success first. And I don't know, I just felt really moved by the story. And for me, put this on here. For me, I don't know if you know my story, but I had a career in insurance, and that was killing me. And I was just so beaten down, and I got into Bitcoin, and I took a lot of leverage out because I was just chasing my own name, trying to find glory in that way of elevating myself, and it just fell apart on me. And it's like, here I am, a middle-aged guy. I don't have any status, right? I don't have a fancy car. I don't have a title. I don't have like a PhD. I really don't have, right? And I work in a restaurant, and I just, I just think about like, what will be my future? How will I make a name for myself, right? That's pretty much what I'm thinking. How do I get the things that I want? How do I impress a woman? How do I get all these things? I don't have the money. I don't have, and and here I read the story about Avram, and it's like, this guy goes against all of that, and he throws all that away. He marries this barren woman as an act of kindness, and yet somehow he still believes in this promise. And it's, I don't know, it just hit all the different things that I've been thinking about and struggling with. And it's like, I do still have a dream. I still have a dream that like I can do this for a living, that I can share. And I wanna, I guess I want to pursue this thing that I find to be amazing and incredible, like these spiritual things, and to share them with people. But right now it's a struggle. I don't know if that dream's going to come true. I don't know if I'll find a place. And it's like, it could take me years to figure this out, and then I won't have a family, right? And it's kind of like, it's just, there's so many unknowns, and it's very scary to take this path. But it's like, here's Avram, right? Here's this guy who threw away his status. Here's this guy who, right, he just said, I'm tired of this place where you're just trying to get your own name, you're trying to get your own stuff. I'm willing to give that up because I know what the right thing is to do, and I have this dream, basically, right? And I'm willing to pursue that dream. And so this is the hidden character of Avram. This is this guy who goes against everything that the world is doing, everything that he knows, because of some conviction inside his heart that he decides to follow. And God is kind of like, oh, what? God is just like, oh my God. Like, he says, God says, oh my God. He says, wow, I can work with this guy. Like, wait a second. This guy's different. Like, he's willing to put his highest values first. He's willing to put me first and to trust in me and to show kindness to someone that is counted out by society, that would be forgotten, that would be disregarded, you know. He's willing to show kindness to the brokenhearted, to the lost, to the, you know, the people that don't have. And that's basically the heart of God. Like, the ultimate nature of reality is one of kindness, which is a really bizarre thing to think because you look at the world and it just seems so ruthless. But God is like, if you're willing to take a bet that the ultimate reality is one of mercy and kindness and strength and like strength of conviction and to know that somehow if you do that, that ultimately things will work out, that your story will turn out okay in some way, you know, then that is actually the secret to life. Like, that is actually the path to enlightenment, essentially, is to trust in, I guess, that the universe is ultimately good, you know, and that if you lay down these things, this insecurity, this desperation, I need to get a family, I need money, and I need income, and I need status, I need to be looked upon with a certain amount of respect and pride, and I want to have achievement in it, right? It's like we're on this treadmill, and it hurts all of us. It's tough. I mean, some of us are winning like crazy, I guess, and that's awesome. But it's like, you know, this is kind of this cruel aspect of society that, you know, on the one hand, it's good, right? It's good status and interacting with other people and society coming together. All that stuff is good, but man, it really has a dark side to it, you know, because there's people that they struggle, and it can crush us, you know. And it just seems like what reality needs, what the world is waiting for, is for one person to be like, you know what? Like, to hell with that. I'm tired of this just dog eat dog, this I'm out for mine, and I got to get my thing going, and I need me, and I got to, you know, it's like me. And I think it's like the world, the universe, whatever, God, however you want to call it, is kind of just waiting for that person to do that, to take that step and to go, just watch what I'm going to do for you. Watch what's going to happen if you just take that risk, if you just decide to lay down this desperate pursuit of status and achievement, you know. So, and it's, you know, it's this tricky thing. It doesn't mean you don't go after the things that you want to go after, but it's like, it's kind of this reshuffling of values. And, you know, for me, it's like, I want to pursue what I feel like is my highest calling, the greatest good that I can give to the world. And you know what? That's like a pretty insecure path. It's like, I don't know what kind of money's going to come out of it. You know, I kind of wish my greatest pursuit was to be a banker. Like, if that was my greatest contribution to the world, because then it's like, I mean, shit, you know, oh, cool, I get to make a bunch of money and feel good about it. But it's, you know, that's not what my highest calling is. And, so anyways, this is the hidden character of Avram right there in the genealogy. And I just love it because what you're seeing, I think the reason why, for me, why it's so hidden, if we kind of go back to this, why it's so subtle, you know, here it is, right? You kind of have to dig through it all, is that there's the Hebrew tradition, this rabbinical tradition, they want you to discover. They don't want to just give it to you in a fucking bullet point. They want you to see it and discover it. Also, there's a modesty to it. Like, if the story was like, and Avram was so selfless, he married the barren woman, da-da-da, you know, you get the feeling that he sort of did it like, he was just like, no, I'm just going to do this. I don't want a fucking award for it. I don't want you to sit and, like, clap your hands for me. Let me just kind of quietly take the blanket and cover over my, like, let me just quietly cover over my daughter's, right, her disgrace, and just take care of her, and let me just be on my way, and I'm going to pursue my path, right? It's just this very modest way of telling the story, and I love that. I'm tired of just, he was so it just drives me insane. So that's kind of how I see it. I really agree with this rabbinical tradition of how they interpreted this, and I think it's just, I don't know, it's amazing. So this is the story, the teaching from BEMA. I hope you liked it, and yeah, pass it along. Pass along this teaching if it moved you. So, all right, well, hey, thanks for joining me.